Hi there, my name is Leyton Schnellert, and I'm so excited to be here with you. It's our fourth year of this series, and it's the second session of this year. Our series this year is called Engaging All Learners in the Middle Years, as past years, but we're focusing on student voice, literacy, and numeracy this year. The first session, which was October 17th, I know the recording is up on the Lando website, but we're also going to do our best to send it out to all folks registered. So keep your eyes open for that, as well as today's recording. This series is a partnership between the University of British Columbia, specifically the Edith Lando Virtual Learning Center, the Rural Education Advisory, which I'm so fortunate to co-chair, and the Greater Victoria School District. And I believe either Tammy or Sean is just going to say hi as part of the welcome.
I will jump in and just say welcome, everyone. We're excited that you're here, and we would like to acknowledge that we are on the traditional territories of the Songhees and Esquimalt nations. Thanks, Leyton.
Thanks, Tammy, and thanks, Sean, for partnering with us in this continued work. I am not joining you from home, everyone. Normally, I'm joining you from Syilx territory or Sinixt territory, where I live and work and research. But today, I am joining you from Richmond, and I understand that we are adjacent to and connected to the Squamish Nation, the Tsleil-Waututh people, and the Musqueam peoples. And so I'm grateful to be here today in this island, on this island, but also to say that I taught here for almost 20 years, and at that time did not know the nations of this place and the histories of this place. And so while I'm deeply connected to where I live and work with local nations, it's a really beautiful opportunity for me to learn and connect with the nations of places that I used to work, and the children and the families that I'm still connected to here. We have two questions that we've been exploring overall in the series this year. One is around how can we welcome the diverse funds of knowledge that middle year students have to deepen and personalize their learning. So how are we bringing in kids and what they bring into their learning? How do we make that connection? And secondly, how can we engage middle years learners with pedagogies that nurture their voices, the development of their identities, as well as really welcoming and celebrating diversity within what we do? We are connecting to the First Peoples principles of learning in this work, specifically that we recognize that all students bring gifts. Today, we also want to highlight that all students are mathematicians and all students are numerate. We also recognize that connecting the First Peoples principles of learning, that we invite learners to express their understanding, not just of concepts, but who they are as learners. And that's part of this work and identity affirming work. And then finally, that we are creating spaces of belonging, and that is such an important aspect of numeracy and math teaching. So I am just so excited to introduce my amazing colleagues who probably are thinking, how did I agree to this? Oh my goodness, Leyton talked me into it again. I've had the pleasure to be a colleague of Shaheen Musani's for, I think we're at 15 years, Shaheen. And together we worked in Richmond and did work. And often I would go to Shaheen's classroom for math examples to really kind of talk about what are we doing and how are we welcoming kids. We're so glad to have you, Shaheen. And Nikki Lineham is back. This year, Shaheen presented in last year's series. Nikki presented in the previous year's series. And Tammy will introduce Nikki at that time. But Nikki, I'm just so glad to be back together. It's been a while since you and I taught side by side, but how fortunate that my colleagues are here sharing their work, who have continue to teach me. And really that's the spirit of this series, everyone, is we're all doing good work and we're all growing the work that we're doing in community. And so here we are hanging out together. The shape of the session today will be that Shaheen will share for about 15 minutes and pause a question or a provocation. Then Nikki will present for about 15 minutes and present a question or a provocation. Then we'll go back to Shaheen for some good times, some good learning with an apostrophe for about 15 minutes or so, and with a provocation. And then finally, Nikki will wrap us up. We won't be going into breakout groups today. We've learned in the series this year that just some kind of interactive is helpful, but that also has helped us manage our time in a really nice flow. But of course, you're welcome to both comment in the chat when you get the prompt, but at any time you can be sharing your thinking and your practice. And exhale. Shaheen, I am just so excited to introduce you and welcome you back to the series this year. Your work both provoked and inspired us last year, colleague, and so we're glad that you've come back this year for our numeracy and math focused session. I just want to honor the work that you do as a district level teacher consultant in the school district, and how you honor both the children and the teachers that you work with and the work that's happening in the district in a way that recognizes the contributions of each human being and what they bring to learning. And so I'll pass on to you, Shaheen. Thanks again for joining us.
Well, thank you, everybody. I'm so happy to be here. I really appreciate the commitment and time you're putting into to just grow your understanding of what numeracy is, to practice some math concepts, to offer some of your feedback. It's definitely a journey when we come to thinking about what numeracy is and how we might practice it in our classrooms, particularly when we teach Marketing 11. And so I'm hoping today that I offer you some different experiences that you can draw upon that might be beneficial to your context, and to think about who your learners are and how numeracy might support their growth as not only individuals, but to really think specifically about how to be empathetic human beings. And so today, building numeracy awareness in practice, I wanted to acknowledge also I'm on the same land as Leyton, but I'll do it in a little bit of a different way. Acknowledge and thank the First Peoples of the Hunkaminam language speaking peoples on whose unceded and untraditional territory or traditional territory that we teach, learn, and live. I feel that when we offer opportunities for students to apply their learning in different ways, and we ignite interest and highlight passion, we are really being inclusive, and our movement towards truth and reconciliation is just that, thinking about how we might really include all learners in our practice. So our first part, we'll think about specifically what is numeracy, how we might build numeracy awareness in our classrooms, and how we might think about numeracy practice as a way of promoting thinking, fostering agency, and encouraging students' voice. We'll start by kind of understanding what numeracy is. Our BC Ministry of Education has shared that literacy and numeracy foundations are pillars of our curriculum, indicating that they are both fundamental to all learning. With language learning and mathematics, literacy and numeracy are applied to all areas of learning. And so this slide sort of looks at what are some of the key pieces or facets that are involved in both. So when we think about literacy foundations, we're thinking about how students are meeting some of their goals and how are they using, how are they building understanding, how are they becoming critically aware and able to critically analyze various forms of text, how can they create a variety of forms of communication. And really, when we're looking at numeracy, it's about problem solving, but in context. And we're drawing upon some of our understanding of math concepts, but applying them into real life situations to enable us to make decisions, to really think about how we might grow our understanding of ourselves, others, and the world around us. So when we look at the definition that the ministry has provided, numeracy is the ability to understand and apply mathematical concepts, processes, and skills to solve problems and make decisions in a variety of situations, including real life scenarios. So I'm putting a question forward. I'd love for you to put some responses into the chat as we move along, really thinking specifically just in this definition alone, and we're thinking specifically about what numeracy is. What competencies do you think students practice while they're engaging in numeracy learning, right? And then further to that, we'll look more at this as we go through our time together, but how might we scaffold some of this practice, within our own classroom? So in the chat, what are some of the key competencies that are jumping out at you just in this definition, right? So we can see that the ability to understand, application of information, applying math concepts, using processes, drawing upon strategies, building skills to solve problems, making decisions, which requires us to really understand particular contexts in real life. And further to that, when we think about kids being involved in problem-solving situations, you really can see that some of the habits of the mind come alive, right? How do I persevere when I come across a situation that is challenging? How do I grow my knowledge about math to help me move forward with this particular learning if I'm interested? All those kinds of things also come alive when we integrate numeracy into our practice. So I wanted to show you specifically about how we are sort of engaging in this in the Richmond School District. There is a working group that's come together to really sit down and think about what numeracy is and how we might build our awareness and practice in classrooms. And so we've come up with a framework with what you see here, which represents the connection between mathematics and numeracy and the many related components. This is particularly for K-2. And as we sort of grow from grade group to grade group, we kind of really think about how these foundations might shift and change depending on the content and competencies that they're practicing. So on the left-hand side, you'll see the mathematical foundations, which really is integrated within the curriculum itself, right? The big ideas and the learning standards, the competencies and the content. Whereas numeracy on the right-hand side, we're really wanting to build awareness about the specific kind of processes that students might engage in as they're solving these problems in real life circumstances, right? Thinking specifically about how we might integrate that in our classroom experiences. What specifically are numeracy tasks, and then how do we communicate with students about their numeracy progress through assessment? And so understanding, though, that mathematical habits of the mind, these dispositions, these competencies are ever growing as we engage in these particular tasks. So let's talk a little bit about what building numeracy can look like. I'm going to show you specifically the process that I used with students when I'm in elementary schools. And because you're in the middle years, I'll show you specifically what I did with grade 4 to 7s. And you can see if you're teaching in the secondary schools, how you might grow these questions, if at all. I ask, what is numeracy? First, get a sort of a picture of prior knowledge. What do kids understand about what this is, right? And put that understanding on the board, somewhere that's visual for them to see and that we can come back to, right? We talk about a little bit about how the work that we're going to do with numeracy is going to be very collaborative most of the time. And that process of learning, unlearning, and building awareness at the same time as problem solving is so critical when we can bounce ideas off of each other, when we actually are practicing a lot of our communication core competency. And so I talk about this and give them a prompt prior to engaging in anything so that they recognize that they need to keep these competencies in mind when they're having conversations and coming up with, a collaborative means of finding a solution, right? We're working towards the same goal, but we also have to practice some of our teamwork skills, right? And so we talk about, sharing how have you used math today so far. People talk a little bit about how many times they brushed particular areas of their teeth, or if they told time, or sometimes it's kind of, around distance and things like that. But then I kind of further their learning and think about how is it that we use math to make important decisions. And so to co-construct a definition for numeracy, I start a process like this, right? On the left-hand side is an image. And I start by asking them what is represented in that image and how they think math was used in that situation and why. But what we really want to know is, what did math help us understand and do, right? Now, I'm so cognizant, having used this slide deck a little bit, that not all children have seen this dish before. right? Or have tried mac and cheese. And so we have to be a little aware of how we can be a little bit more inclusive. So I break it down and I say it's a pasta dish that includes some cheese sauce, and we get a lot of opinions about what that might taste like by those kids. But what I do is record some of their thinking. So the math in here is the size of the bowl, the quantity of the product, the measurements, so that we can come back to this as we categorize some of the things that are arising. And we think about how that relates to us being able to make decisions or to learn more about ourselves and others, right? And another situation is to kind of really think about what's meaningful in their own environment. So one of the schools I was working at, was in the process of deliberating, what's playground to build. And so we were thinking specifically about, well, where's the math in this? What is it that we need to consider as we are trying to build? And they bring in so much knowledge, not only about, structural components, but to really think about, how the pack might be involved in tallies. And it's really interesting to watch students apply their math in these circumstances, right? So once we have a few of those, we build a definition similar to the one that the ministry offers, but putting it in their own language. Numeracy is our ability to use math to help us solve problems or help us learn more about ourselves, others, and the world around us. It also is a way of using math to help us make decisions, right? So how might we nurture numerate learners? Well, we build awareness. We provide opportunities for students to engage in numeracy tasks. We use numeracy to deepen understanding of key concepts. We assess numeracy skills, right? And we involve students in core competency reflection. So let's take a look at what that how that plays out in a classroom. So there are 4 types of numeracy tasks that have been sort of shared by the Ministry of Education, and kind of what has been how our graduation numeracy assessments have been designed. A fair share task is one in which requires them to share something fairly. A plan and design is one that requires some, analysis while building something. And a reasoned estimate is to determine or use estimates to determine a solution. And a modeling question is to develop a model or a strategy given a set of data, and then to try it out using another set of data. So having that sort of in mind, we can construct tasks that are meaningful to particular content and competencies that we're exploring. And we can also build some of these key numeracy processes also outlined by the ministry. When we learn how to interpret a problem, when we learn how to apply our mathematical understandings, our strategies and processes, we pick some way of being able to solve this problem, and we have some rationale as to why we've done that. We solve it, we analyze it, and we really have to justify our thinking in that process. What is rooted in these numeracy tasks is our ability to communicate with whoever we're engaging in about a process we're using to come up with a solution. And so we can see how fundamental language is in the process of that, right? And so how do we support students with building that language? How do we support students with talking about their processes and things like that? So here's what it might look like. We can start by just sort of connecting tasks to whatever math concepts that we might be studying in the classroom. So for example, in a grade 3-4 class, we can ask, what different ways can you make 1,000 for grade 3s or 10,000 for grade 4? So they can work in groups to find a solution to the problem. They record their thinking and they explain their answer, right? So then the number concepts that are involved in this are anything around counting, arranging numbers, using operations like addition, subtraction. Some draw upon their knowledge of multiplication. We might want to extend thinking to get them to use equations, and then applying some of that. And, so why is this a numeracy task? And how is this different than just using math? Well, you mean there can be a number of solutions to this, right? And the ways that students demonstrate their understanding of those concepts can differ. And so we can see that on the left-hand side, the picture there, students were using like blocks, base 10 blocks and things like that. On the right-hand side, she's going right to her algorithmic means of finding a solution. But what is beautiful about this is that we're giving students agency because they're able to draw upon, you know, whatever process that they have to come up with a solution, and they're deciding with their collaborative partners which ones to share. But the question asks them to come up with as many as possible, right? Another example here, if you're familiar with Peter Lilladell, students were exploring some addition and subtraction of decimals. And so we practiced, you know, a task that allowed them to figure out which class pet that they could get. As a initial means, we said, okay, go, just work with your group, figure out a process for coming to a solution, and then justify your answer. You got to explain to me why this is the particular animal that you think that the pack is going to select to purchase for you. And they had to show their thinking, but we didn't say how. So some of this looked a lot like this, right? Some kids organize their thinking, some kids have their work all over the place. But as a means of just starting and initiating practice in classrooms, we want to be messy. We want to know what it is that they know how to do so that we can do a little bit of formative assessment here and figure out what it is, like, you know, how is that going to inform my instruction moving forward? They might benefit specifically from having a graphic organizer that really gets them to understand what interpreting is. We really want them to also think about what is application, right? What does it mean to apply, right? What parts of this involve solving? And so forth. But then actually we can sit down and look at how we might assess. And so of those processes outlined by the ministry, I'm looking specifically at the application, the solving, and the communicating of thinking. And it looks like some of my chart is cut off here, but those are proficiency indicators that we've come up with. The teacher and I work to think about, okay, what is it that students are going to be able to demonstrate at a proficient level when they're applying their knowledge during this particular task? What is it that I'm looking for in their solutions? And specifically when they're communicating their thoughts about processes, about their solutions, what is it that I want to see? So students can have an opportunity to self-assess, and then we can offer some feedback, descriptive feedback that shares what are their strengths, what are their stretches, and what are their next steps. But in the end, they've got to explain how this math was used to help solve a problem in real life, right? So this is the basics of numeracy, of practice that we can get into when we're in a classroom. Here's the reflection. How is numeracy important in your own life? And how might you build numeracy practice into your instruction? So in the chat, if you have moments, if you're not driving and tuning in at other places, it'd be lovely to hear from you. How is numeracy important in your own life? How might you build numeracy practice into your instruction? I'm just going to stop sharing so I can take a look at the chat. Numeracy is everywhere. I love that. In home renos, absolutely. Budgeting, I could learn a thing or two from that. and all those things. It's everywhere. Estimation skills. Right. Angela says, I really like the simple integration of how have you used math today, right? Well, beautiful. Thank you so much for offering your feedback. I'm cognizant of time. Would love to hear from Nikki.
Thank you so much. I think I'll jump in, Leyton, and I am very excited to introduce Nikki Lineham. Nikki is an amazing educator. She's the co-founder of Educating Now, a PhD candidate studying culturally responsive math pedagogy. She is super passionate about making math and numeracy accessible for everyone. And I know she's my go-to to support us here in the district. We're super happy that she's close and can pop in and do some work with us. So welcome, Nikki.
HKCM Tammy. It's Squeechel. Quenas Quinana CM Asa Nikki. So good day. Nice to see you, honorable ones. My name is Nikki. That was me butchering the beautiful language of Senchothan, which is the language of the lands on which I live. Senchothan and Lekwungen share about 95% of their lexicon, and I do live on the shared territories of Lekwungen speaking peoples and Wasanich peoples. My teacher, Senchothan teacher, Joe Seward, I was lucky to audit a UVic class, but the message I'm hearing from him and my other teachers are that language and culture are so closely intertwined, and that's why language revitalization is so key to cultural revitalization and vice versa. So it's an invitation to learn a greeting, perhaps, or to say thank you in the language on the lands where you're from. First Voices is also an app if you don't have the accessibility to learn the language through a more formal course. So I am going to jump in today and share a couple of different things. The first section here is going to be on number talks. So some of you might be super familiar with these and some of you might not. I would love to see, before I share my slides, can you use the reactions button and give me a thumbs up if you're using number talks in your practice currently? And you can do a thumbs down if you're not. That doesn't mean that like you're booing them, but it's just a visual indicator for me. I'm just curious. All right, so we got a good mix, some yes, some no. So hopefully those that are familiar, you might, pick up something new. Hopefully it adds to your practice, and those that are not familiar with them, I feel like number talks are such a game changer. They are a huge leverage point, and I really truly believe they ought to be used all the way through the grade levels. And sometimes people are using them in the elementary school, but not beyond. So, and one of the things, tying into what Shaheen was just saying is they help to develop the math foundational skills that students need in order to apply their math skills for numeracy. Number talks are also a part of culturally responsive pedagogy. They are a part of how we center student voices and student experiences. They also do a beautiful job building community. So they're so much more than a mathematical routine. To me, they are this whole equity pedagogy piece. So I wanted to show you a picture of the book that I highly recommend as a resource for the middle years. It is aimed at grades 4 through 10. And it's the one by Kathy Humphreys and Ruth Parker. They've been doing this work for decades. They are masters, and it's a beautifully written, easily accessible book. So just in a brief, I'm giving you the fast and furious version of number talks. I could spend like hours on this. So essentially what they are is they are a daily routine. Okay, so the research shows if they're not done at least 3 times a week, then they're not all that effective. So it's a 5 to 15 minute practice. And again, I know sometimes you, high school folks, your time is crunched. You don't have all day with the students like some of the elementary school folks. It is worth every minute you spend. I promise you, I've seen it in all contexts, and it's always been super beneficial. If you do have your students all day, I invite you not to do this as part of your math class, but to do it as part of a transition. It's like a little bonus math, which I always think the more we can like sneak some bonus numeracy in, the better. So they are a focus on computations with strategies. So we're moving away from just rote memorizing with the idea that students do come to memorize, or at least are automatic in their ability to use strategies. But the strategies do so much more than just rote memorizing, because they help us to develop algebraic thinking skills. They also help us to recall facts when we forget them, because we know that those neural pathways can go extinct if we don't use them often enough. It invites all students into the process. It really honestly values diversity, and it helps students to see that, holy smokes, math can actually be thought about in lots of different ways, and it can be creative. And it creates this really beautiful culture that really embraces the mistake making that is necessary for learning, even though it's deeply uncomfortable, especially in math, it seems, for a lot of people. And it provides that daily fluency practice, which, again, I don't care whether you're teaching grade 4 or 9, we know our students need it. And I love that they're so student-centered. So what we're going to do here is I'm just going to model for you what it's like. So I am going to need a few brave souls to unmute themselves, because you are going to need to talk me through your thinking. The rest of you, if you're thinking, no way, that's not me, at least put in your answers in the chat, and you can even put in your thinking. But I'm hoping there's a few fellow math geeks out there that are willing to share. And I'm going to say right from the get-go, it's totally okay to be wrong. I'm going to be asking you to think in ways that you might not always do, and it's okay to make mistakes. That's how we learn. So if you were my students, this is a little hard to do virtually, but what I would say to them is, I'm going to show you in a moment an image, and it's a series of dots. And all I want you to do is to count how many dots there are. There's one caveat, and that is I don't want you to count by ones. So I want you to group them in some way and come up with how many you think there are. When you have an answer, you're going to give me a quiet thumb. I'm not going to be able to see you because I can only see like 4 people, but this is what you would do in your classroom. The quiet thumb is deliberate. It is not a hands up on purpose. It reduces anxiety. None of the others need to know who's ready. Now, the cool thing is then you say to them, but you're not allowed to stop. If you have one way of how you group those dots to figure out the answer, I want you to do some mental gymnastics and come up with a second way. If you can do 2 ways of grouping, you show it to me like this. 3 ways would be like this. So for you, the educator, in real time, what this looks like is you will have some kids in your class that are showing you this, quite literally, they have 6 ways. By the time you get another student showing you their first way. And that's great, it's brilliant. They're all working at their level. They're all actively engaged. And we're giving that respective think time to those students that desperately need it. Now, when they're done and you've pretty much got all at least a thumb up, then I'm going to call on the student that had that thumb up right at the end. I'm not going to call on Mr. 6 Answers until a little later on. So I'll go through this with you, I'll model it, and then we'll have you do some reflection. If you have questions along the way, please jump in. After we do dot cards, the process changes a little bit. I'm going to walk you through that. We start with dot cards for all grades. Okay, so whether you're teaching 9th grade or 4th grade, you're going to start with dot cards. How many you decide to do is totally up to you. Students that have, if you have a lot of math anxiety in your class, you might want to do several examples of the dot cards. They love doing it, so they'll have no problem continuing with that. Okay, friends, here we go. So I'm going to show you. Do not put in your answer and press enter yet. Put it in, but don't press enter because we want to give think time to all of our colleagues. So how many dots are there? And I'm going to ask you the follow-up question afterwards of how did you see them or how did you count them? And while you're thinking and putting it in your chat, I'm going to switch over to my other camera. Can you see my image now with the dots on a piece of paper? Is that visible for you? Okay, perfect. So this is what it would look like if you were my students. I would ask, how many dots do you see? So I'm going to ask someone to unmute because I'm not going to try to manage a chat. So someone unmute. Tell me how many dots you see, please.
13.
Thank you. What I would then do next is I would say, did anyone see a different number of dots? And I would continue to write all the answers that were given to me. And sometimes you'll have one answer, sometimes you will have many answers. Then I don't ever say what's right or what's wrong. I just say, thank you. Are there any other answers? Thank you. Are there any other answers? Then we get to have a cool math debate if there are more than one. And students get to prove how many they think there are. So can someone jump in, unmute, and tell me how you saw them? And I'm going to do my best to scribe what you're saying. How did you see them?
Nikki, I can go. Nikki, I saw 7, 7, and then I took one away because there was one in common.
And where did you see the 7 and the 7? Like circles?
Circle with one in the middle, and then another circle with one in the middle, and then I took away the common one.
So 7 plus 7 minus the common one. 13. Did I capture your thinking?
Yeah, it's just slowly updating what's happening on what you're doing to what's happening on the screen.
I don't know why it's doing that. See if we can get it to move a little quicker. So, and then I know that was Tammy. This wasn't in any of the books I read, but I did a little informal experiment, and I found that when I wrote the name beside the strategy, the participation in future skyrocketed. And that was just as true for reluctant grade 9 kids as it was for the younger ones. Then I would ask the students who did it the same as Tammy. They can raise their hands, who did it differently. So I would love to hear from someone who did it differently.
So I looked at the 3 lines, and it was 4, 5, 4. So I did 4 plus 4 is 8 plus 5 is 13.
Thank you. And you broke that down. Who am I talking to?
Toulon.
How do you spell that?
TU space capital LOAN.
Thank you, Toulon. So the way you described it, and I don't know why my thing is not working properly. Maybe it'll catch up here. And that's frustrating. Let's see. Is that what you, so I'm visually representing, and then this is the really important math bits from the dot cards is we're really looking at partitioning. We're also potentially looking at addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, depending on how the students are seeing it. So we can keep going. So then who saw it the same as Toulon? Who saw it differently still? Let's try, actually I'm gonna move on. Moving on. And hopefully my little screen will participate a little bit better. I stop share and reshare. So once you've done a few dot cards, we want to shift over and move into computations. And this is where the fluency work comes in. So, and I've added in a few words here for you. Man, I don't know why it's going so slowly today. What additive strategy did you use? So when I say that, we want to move students from grade 3 onwards. We want them to be using additive strategies for addition instead of counting. So we're going to ask them not to use counting on. We're going to ask them to like break apart those numbers and regroup them. So here again, I did this with a grade 9 classroom 3 years ago, and we literally had 8 different answers to this question. And obviously it does have one answer, but it lends itself to a really great debate. So what are the answers? And I know I'm probably just going to get one answer from you all, but we'll give it a go. And I'm almost tempted to try and like do this via Zoom instead of do my other camera, but I am going to try and share and see if it works any better than it was doing before. My apologies. It's worked really well every other time I've used it. Okay. So I would love to hear from folks on how you solve this, and what my job is now, what your job is the scribe. So it's to show a visual representation of the strategy. So how did you solve 7 plus 8? First of all, I would ask what answer did you get? I'm going to assume you say 15. If there's multiple answers, I would keep writing them down. Someone jump in, please, and share your strategy.
I can share. This is Shannon.
Thanks, Shannon.
I took 2 away from the 7 and added it to the 8 to make 10. And then I had 5 left over. So then 10 plus 5 is 15.
Awesome. So I'm going to do a little makeshift 10 frame because I feel like that's a good visual for the strategy. So there's my 7. Let's see, it's not working. There's my 8. I'm wondering if I should just skip over. My apologies, folks. You said you took 2 from there, added it to there. So essentially you bridged to 10 and you made 10. So then you ended up with a full 10. You had your 5 left over. And our brains do a whole lot better with 5 plus 10 than they do with 7 plus 8. So that would be an example of how to create a visual representation of the strategy of bridging to 10. So this is where the job of the teacher does get a bit more challenging. And sometimes people will say, how do you know how to do a visual? And the answer is sometimes you don't, and that's okay. I've had many times where I'm like, I don't know how to represent that visually. So I'll ask the students, does anyone see a way to do it visually? And if they all say no, we move on to the next strategy. What I did find for myself when I started these several years ago, I got better quite quickly over time. I was not fabulous at the beginning, and that's okay. The work that we were doing, even just strategy sharing, was where the benefit came from. I always think back to Vygotsky's, like the more knowledgeable peer, getting in that zone of proximity. And this is what this does. We have students in our classrooms that all have varying levels of mastery with strategy. Some have no strategies at all besides counting. So for them to hear all of these strategies every single day is what helps them to develop fluency in a way that I've never seen before. And also one thing to add on is once you start working on these strategies, you can reinforce them if you feel like, whoa, this is a strategy that many of them don't know. I then will often play a quick card or dice game that allows them to practice that strategy, even for 5 to 7 minutes. It makes a huge difference. So, and I know that you might be thinking, this is middle years, why are we doing 7 plus 8? I'm currently working in a grade 8-9 class, and this is what we are doing. And we're playing Make 10 Go Fish because the students didn't know the pairs of numbers that make 10. And until they know that, these types of strategies aren't accessible to them. I'm just going to write one more on here and I'll have you jump into the chat. This one's going to be deliberately a little bit more challenging for you. And all of these, didn't show you. All of these number talks are written horizontally on purpose because we're moving away from stacking algorithms. And the reason for that is the stacking algorithms are digit math. They're not number math. They don't help to build number sense. They're designed for efficiency, but not for developing conceptual understanding. So here's your question, folks. Please try to do this without doing the traditional algorithm if you can. And then share strategy. And I'm looking at the time, I'm running over. So I'm just going to ask one person to share out. What could be a strategy for solving this mentally? Who wants to be
Can I
brave?
hop in?
Yes, please.
Okay, I took 3 away from 42 to make the 27-30, and then I had 39 and 30, which is 69. I think my adding's right, but I could be off. I don't know.
I'm just trying to follow you. So you took 3 away from 27 and you added it to the 42?
No, I took 3 away from the 42 and added it to the 27 to make it a whole number of 30. And then I had 39 and 30, which was way easier for me to add.
It's a subtracting question, not an adding question.
Oh, it is. It is. So see, I told you I was probably wrong.
And that's
too
okay.
long.
So, and this is what's so beautiful is this exact same thing happens in the classroom, and it gives students the opportunity to make a mistake. And then they're like, oh my gosh, I didn't actually die. I can make mistakes. And this is a part of how we learn. And that's a really common mistake. So that one would have been great for addition. That's why I was getting a bit confused. Who has one for subtraction? 42 subtract 27.
I'll risk it, Nikki. It's Leyton.
Hi, Leyton.
Okay, I went 30 minus 20 is 10. And then 12 minus 7 is 5.
So I would model that with probably base 10 blocks, because that's the way that went for my brain. And you did 30 minus the 20 leaves me with 10. So you broke up your 42 into 30 and 12.
Yeah.
And then you, from your 12, you took away those two plus half of that. So it left you with 5.
Yeah.
So you ended up with 15.
Yeah.
So that would be the visual I chose for that strategy, because to me that makes sense. But that's up to you as the teacher. So that's where these can get a bit tricky. I'm going to stop there. And my question for you in the chat is, what do you notice about number talks, or what do you wonder? Or if you're using them, how are you using them? Share with us your expertise and your strategies. So pop in there a noticing, a wondering, or sharing with us a little snippet of what works for you. And then we'll pass it over to Shaheen. And I'm sorry I went over time. Oh, and I like all these answers in the chat that I'm now finding to see. And you had all sorts of great strategies. Love it. One thing I get asked a lot is, hey, Nikki, can you repeat? Stacking is digit math. When we do stacking, yeah, it's digit math. When we use these strategies, it's number math, because number has value. So when we do the digits thing, we're removing place value. And the problem with it is kids only work with up to 9. So then we say, hey, estimate 30 times 40. And they're like, what? Because they've never had a chance to do anything bigger than 9 times 9. This helps a lot with math anxiety. You can also do a think, pair, share before you share out loud to the class for those kids that are super anxious. That has helped a lot. All right, let's jump into our next section.
Thanks, Nikki. We're going to head back to Shaheen. I love myself some number talks.
Okay, close enough. I'm hoping you can see that. Okay, so for this component, we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to go deeply into how we might use numeracy to design and plan tasks to deepen understanding of big ideas. We also really want to focus on how we might use numeracy as a means for exploring identity and acting for justice. So the first thing that I really do and want to think about when we're nurturing student voice and we're really engaging students in thinking and providing opportunities for them to grow their agency is you think about the kind of relationship between these big concepts and words. And when I was sort of throwing these words around with colleagues, because they sort of apply to various aspects of teaching and learning, specifically when it comes to assessment, right? How do we build practices of safety in our classroom so that we can build a sense of belonging? However, you know, when creating this slide, we deliberated on the order in which these facets could be placed. We wanted to think about, does safety, you know, lead to feelings of belonging? If we have a sense of belonging in a community, do we engage? What we are realizing is that all these are intertwined and deeply connected to our instructional and assessment practices, reminding us that learning takes time. And it takes patience, that it requires timely, thoughtful, and meaningful practices that are inclusive and feedback that can be processed and acted upon by all those that are involved in supporting students with their learning. So what we want to think about is what numeracy practices could contribute to feelings of safety and belonging. How might these pillars of classroom community lead to student engagement? Students who feel a strong sense of belonging are more engaged and more likely to take risks. They might use feedback to move their learning forward, to develop their independence, and to communicate their own learning goals, because that foundation of safety is in place. So we want to invite you to think really about how we can create spaces of safety in our classroom around numeracy, right? Around community building. I wanted to sort of draw upon in this section, particularly a framework that was developed by Louise Derman Sparks and Julie Olson Edwards, and it's around anti-bias and anti-racist education. Remembering really that when we're truly involved in anti-bias and anti-racist education, that we're doing more than just these occasional activities about diversity, and we really want to be effective in it by underpinning some of these perspectives that permeate most of what we do. So if you're not familiar with this sort of framework, there are four main goals of anti-racist education as described by these two authors. And it's really based on how learners construct identity and attitudes, where they think about identity as supporting children to feeling so that they feel strong and proud of who they are, so that they can think about what diversity means and how we might grow empathy and show respect and care. But when we're specifically working on, embedding numeracy in our instructional practice, I'm going to focus on the bottom two, around justice and activism. So in this case, justice refers to stated by them, teachers will foster each child's capacity to critically identify bias and each child's empathy for the hurt bias causes. Children will increasingly recognize unfairness, have language to describe unfairness, and understand that unfairness hurts. And so I wanted to give you a secondary example of how we might really focus learning on building our understanding of justice. And so I thought I would dig into Social Studies 9. But if you're in elementary school, a lot of the grade 4 to 7 curriculum is centered around students understanding historical wrongs. And so this also applies in that context too, right? So some of the curricular competencies that we could focus on in this particular unit of study is around significance, right? Historical significance and continuity of change. And the content we might focus on is around continuing effects of colonialism, looking at global demographic shifts or even local specifically. We look specifically at discriminatory policies, attitudes, and historical wrongs. And some of the terms that are really important in, and underpinning our sort of study together are listed there. We'd have to really think specifically about how we might support students with this learning, right? The continuity and change social studies competency can be really challenging for learners to grow because the timeline of events that they're focusing on in grades 4 to 9 might be really a far stretch as they explore Canada's historical wrongs in depth, right? From when we're thinking about the mid to late 1800s and to now over 150 years can be challenging. And as we consider, how lives and conditions are alike over time and how they've changed, we can really think about how to support students with making meaning of this content so that they can determine what they might do with it, right? So the selection of resources that we use, the instructional strategies that we have, the activities that we're engaging in students in are so crucial, right? And critical as we plan and implement through a justice lens. So think about what other learning and support students might benefit from as we engage in really deep learning like this. For example, what role might story play, right? In the formation of, in supporting students learning from others. So if, for example, I want to explore the big ideas, exploring my relationship with change might help me build resilience and empathy. And later we might look specifically at how we might support Canadian settlers in finding a sense of belonging and voice if we learn more about their history, contributions, and perspectives. And where we're talking specifically about minority immigrants. I'm going to invite you to take a look at the data that's displayed on this screen and kind of think about how it is a numeracy task. This is a graph that's taken from Statistics Canada that represents something. It says the historical axis represents the year of immigration. Draw from your knowledge of history, and in the chat, suggest a timeline for the years of immigration that might be represented on this graph. And also think specifically about what those peaks and valleys might represent. So I'm going to give you a few minutes to take a closer look at that. I'm hoping it's clear on your end, but we're specifically looking at population and year of immigration and what's happening in Canada over time. So think about what that range and timeline could be and what those specific events that could have led to those peaks and valleys. I'll give you a couple of minutes to try to put something in the chat. 1800 to 200 to the 2000s for sure, and it's definitely when colonization took place, and some of those peaks and valleys have to do with those push and pull factors going on globally. And someone mentioned the potato famine and that sort of thing. And so yes, the mid to late 1800s to the year 2000s. And so we really want to think about, in grade 9, how would we support students with being able to analyze this particular graph to help them understand, or pull upon their prior knowledge of push and pull factors to get them thinking along the lines of what change of demographic is looking like in Canada as migration is occurring. We might invite them to tell their own stories and collect our own data and do a comparison to draw in some more experience, and so that they can make those connections. I'm going to show a new graph. So there's new census data that's come out, and it's really fascinating to see the impact that immigration is having. And if you look really closely at the data, which I'll put in some of these links into the chat after I stop talking, but it's really fascinating to look at what Canada's values are around their choices and decisions about what types of immigrants to support, and it's very crystal clear in the pages that I'll show you. The Statistics Canada analysis, what's going on. So this might be something that we can offer students to do as well, is to really think about what data is represented here, right? And then to draw upon their knowledge of history to describe the patterns that they notice in this data. Now, this one is specifically on immigration, so we should obviously see an increase over time, but what's interesting is the projected, right? And you want them to kind of think about how the data is kind of affirming or changing their understanding of Canadian immigration since the time period that's illustrated, which is 1871. Now, this data comes from census collection. So there's a whole bunch of questions that we can think about that comes up from this, just viewing this particular graph. And if you have the time and can commit, and you are practicing, how to develop essential questions for students about going on their own independent inquiries, you can really think about what types of inquiry questions that could lead to further investigation here, right? I'd have a lot of questions around how the census was conducted in 1871 and who was conducting them and how that information was collected. I'd have questions around, what that means for our population now, and wanting to connect it to maybe data that we saw on the previous graph. What is that indicating in terms of the peaks and valleys, and how is that sort of changing with time? So as we saw in those last few slides, that gives us, information and resources to explore with students to deepen their understanding of past historical events, You know, you might have done some thinking around, you know, the timeline of events, but this particularly gets them to make specific connections to it. It gives them agency because they can select what aspect of it that they want to study. It gives them some time to collaborate and think together, right? We can even move on to think specifically now, if we're looking at continuity and change, what the impacts of this movement was or is on people. And so these are just a couple of articles that I found quickly, but when, you know, it was very evident during the pandemic, some of the experiences that people were having. And so to have a sit down conversation with students and reading their voices, particularly when it comes from a Canadian source, kids share experiences of anti-Asian racism in the pandemic. And then specifically looking at efforts that look towards how we might support members of our own community. So that requires us to understand what activism is. And with this particular goal in this framework, it says teachers will cultivate each child's ability and confidence to stand up for oneself and for others in the face of bias. Children will demonstrate a sense of empowerment and the skills to act with others or alone against prejudice. We really want to think about how we might invite students to think about what activism is to them and what actions might be associated with it. And here's what I mean by that. I attended like a conference or a workshop online that had to do with decolonizing our assessment practices. And this was offered by one of the presenters as a means for thinking about anti-bias and anti-racist education and work coming alive. And so this is how they describe activism as I provide leadership to enhance others' knowledge and understanding. I seek out opportunities to act on the injustices towards Indigenous peoples. My informed understanding is impacting systems and structures. So you have to really think about who your students are and think about, you know, how do they view activism within their own home, and how is it sort of realized? So we are critically thinking about what is acceptable for us and what are some of the motions that we can use moving forward. So going back to this slide, really thinking specifically about how does numeracy enable us to really understand deep concepts related to history in our own nation, and what sorts of structures need to be in place in order for us to have those conversations, and what kind of collaborative learning can take place that involves numeracy to help us deepen our understanding of those things. So my reflection to you is around this. How might you use data to deepen understanding of key concepts? And how is numeracy practice essential to developing an understanding of structures and systems, enabling us to commit to activism? So I'll give you just a few more minutes to pop a response into the chat. I know this is more heavy than what we were exploring before, but if you can think about something, that'd be great. Yeah, I love the idea of, it's actually part of the grade 9 math curriculum for students to look at how data, to analyze data for its relevance, accuracy, and validity, and to really think about how it might be misconstrued. And so this last comment about looking for bias in data is really important. Teaching students critical analyzing skills about that is really important. Thank you for sharing about activism with evidence. Right, tells us what it does not tell or chooses not to tell. Yeah. data can be a really powerful starting point for deep conversations around social justice. Even last week, leading up to Trans Day of Remembrance, we looked at the data of how people had passed away, where the reports were from in the world, and considering why the number is likely a lot higher than what it was reported. It's such a powerful way to make connections visually and quickly. But what I really invite you to think about is, how do we support students with practicing those data analysis skills? What frameworks do we need in place? Do they need, thinking prompts? Do they need sentence stems? Do they need a template, a graphic organizer to help them through the process of analysis? If the world were 100 people, yes, based on a picture book, exactly. I like how I think it's been updated recently to include some of the new data. I've used data to look at scarcity. I've used data to look at gentrification. It's such a lovely way to think about people, our relationships and community, and so forth. And with that, I think it's time to pass it over.
Thank you. Of course, my phone's going to ring. Leyton, is this you or me? I'll give it to you because my phone's ringing.
Thanks, Shaheen. That was terrific and a beautiful build from last year's presentation. We're going to pass back to Nikki to wrap things up with ethnomathematics.
Yeah, and thank you. And Shaheen already just kind of gave us some examples, because that is an example of ethnomathematics. I feel in some ways that the term ethnomathematics is a little bit of a misnomer, because it really is about more than math. It's a integration of all what we would say as subject areas, which is a very Western approach to education, to put subjects artificially into silos. So Dr. Ubatarian D'Ambrosio coined this term in the 70s, ethnomathematics. He just passed away in May. I had the great privilege of attending a lecture that he gave. I was in the first cohort of the postgraduate certificate in ethnomathematics at the University of Hawaii in 2018 to 19. So essentially, it's the mathematics practiced by cultural groups. And when I say that, that can be like the culture of grade 9s. It doesn't have to do with their ethnicity. It has to do with the music they like, the social media that they're into, the sports they like to play. So I really want us to expand this idea of culture. And I'm saying this deliberately because I struggled immensely with this when I first started studying culturally responsive. I kept going to content. And I will tell you that the core of ethnomathematics is not at all the content, it's the pedagogy. It's how we are teaching children. It is centering their voices, and it is not teaching by telling, but it is incorporating their ideas in a way more fluid, authentic fashion. So I was lucky enough to attend this program. Dr. Linda Ferrudo is really the one who has been spearheading this. Started off as an undergraduate course. I will tell you, at the University of Hawaii, in the first 5 years that this was offered for students, enrollment in math from Hawaiian Native students grew by 1,400%. So if we're talking about a way to engage people who have historically been excluded from mathematics, this is ethnomath. I consider it to be numeracy in combination with eco-justice and social justice. So it's all about real world problem solving, to empower students to be locally minded global citizens. It's rooted in students' identities as authors of mathematics. We stated at the beginning, all students are mathematicians. Yes, they are. And it's rigorous. It's not just like airy-fairy, it's worthwhile, and it's relevant, meaningful, and contextualized. So when I look at what numeracy is, this just blends beautifully. And when I get to the how, that's the collaborative. We touched on it a little bit. It needs to be emphasized more, but for lack of time, collaboration is a key piece of that pedagogy. Students aren't meant to be sitting silent in desks in a row. And we need to teach them how to collaborate. It's an explicit set of skills that they often don't necessarily come to us with. It's all about sense making. So I love it because it's rooted in equity, and it also is 100% perfectly aligned with First People's principles of learning. When I was looking at the two, I was like, oh, these are actually one and the same. So I'm not going to list off all of these, just to let you know that they are aligned. And I was looking at that because ethnomathematics came out of Brazil, and has been used in Hawaii. So I was like, well, what about a BC context? And we definitely have it. So this is an example that I felt was doable for all of us. I have done this exact project or activity with grade 4, 5, 6, 7. It could absolutely be done with 8, 9. So the idea is you're choosing a beach, a park, or lands near your school. This is something that's doable. It doesn't have to involve a huge big field trip. We want to step into this in ways that are accessible for us. I use the Gorge Waterway because I was close by at that time here in Victoria. This is where we invite elders, knowledge keepers, and if you don't have access to those people, get out good old Google. What is the historical significance of the land? So I learned about the gorge, that it was like the main waterway, and it also houses a whole bunch of little critters that don't exist anywhere in the world. It's the food source. It's a source of medicines. It's a source of materials for making houses and mats and clothing and all sorts of things. So what students are going to be doing is estimating, they're going to be doing sampling. But we do it in a very non-sophisticated sort of way. I'm just going to walk you through the connect process and transforming. I was lucky. So there's places like the World Fish Organization, and I reached out and they for free came with a touch tank and had the students able to like these are the real critters. And so they got to know who's living in this waterway, because once they met those little critters, they were a whole lot more invested in how do we keep this waterway healthy for these for the animals living within it. So we looked at what's the historical importance of this waterway, what's the contemporary significance of it, who's using it, why are they important, how have they been altered, and reach out to folks in your community to help you with that. So that's the connecting piece, and we're not just connecting to their learning and what they already know, but also to the lands or the waters themselves. We then looked at how to use our body to measure 1 meter squares, and we used our arms, we used our legs, and students got to know their bodies in terms of linear measurements. And then we had them mark out meter squares all along the waterway, and they had to count the number of garbage, jot it all down, keep all the data. And then they would engage in service learning, which is a big part of ethnomathematics, and they would pick up that garbage, and you have to do a bunch of safety stuff for it. I do have this written up as a whole big thing. If people want it, I'll pop my email in because I'm not going to go into it in any more detail here. Then we estimated, okay, so together we mapped out maybe 20 square meters along this waterway, and we picked up 150 pieces of garbage. How much would there be if we did the entire waterway? And then how many volunteer hours would be needed if we wanted to clear this all up? So they're engaging in varying levels of mathematics. In some groups, I had them try to do a scale map of the meter squared and then estimate how many square meters using aerial photos. It's hard, it was significant math, but they were so invested in it. And we were using it to estimate both the amount of garbage and then the volunteer hours. And one group we went into, well, what happens if we don't pick up the garbage? Well, it turns into microplastics. What are microplastics? And then we can look at that, and the effects of that get very interesting and quite disturbing. But it's something that they just got super hooked into, and it was hard to actually stop the project because they wanted to go, and they were using mathematics to solve problems that mattered to them. I invited the task, but they definitely took it into a whole new dimension. So I just wanted to share, because I know we're running short on time, and I really wanted to share this with you, but I was like, it's too far-fetched for things that people could do in their own context. I just had the privilege, the honor of taking this group of Tlingit and Yupik youth from Angoon, Alaska to Hawaii on an ethnomathematics institute. So we spent 5 days learning on the land, from the land. Dr. Florence Glanfield, who's one of my committee members, often asks the question, how can the land be your teacher? And so I invite you to think about that question. And our theme for this year was food sovereignty, because both Hawaii and Angoon as islands import between 80 and 90% of their food, and the costs are astronomical. And so we're looking at how can we reduce that and remove food scarcity, and also revitalize native plants and native food sources that are a lot more nutritious than Cheetos. So we also connected to some voyaging canoes because they had previously been doing that work. And we also connect to art. We did some Lahala weaving and connected to cedar weaving. These are quotes from the students. I read them last night and I thought I'm just going to pop them in here because I want you to see the impact. So this is 5 days of doing this math on the land with these kids. So as you can see, Taryn said, math has so much to do with our artwork. That's what I would like to do. So I learn as much as I can when math and culture are mixed together. She's the one holding the large paddle, and that is her artwork on that paddle. It is beautiful. She's a stunning artist, and she's hoping to apprentice under her uncle, who is an artist and jeweler. And Cheyenne said, I want to learn more math. Seeing how complex navigating is really is made me really impressed and makes me want to know complex math as well. And so what we're seeing is this ethnomath is a way to engage kids who historically haven't had their ancestry and their culture represented because they've only been exposed to Western mathematics. And Western mathematics is one type of mathematics. Ethnomathematics is another, but mathematics as a whole is really broad. And sometimes we get really stuck in our box thinking it's only Western mathematics because that's actually the only math we've been exposed to. So I invite you to, if this is something that you think, oh, what? Google ethnomathematics. The University of Hawaii has a whole curriculum library. I've also created lessons. You're welcome to email me if you want to learn more. I could talk about this for 24 days in a row, but I'm going to stop right now so we can wrap it up with a final little provocation with that little amuse-bouche about ethnomath. What ideas sparked for you, or where and how might you mathematically explore and connect to the land or lands and or community within your school context? And start small, folks. Like, I'm honestly all about baby stepping into this, because sometimes when we see these examples, we think, oh, that's so much. What's something doable for you? And I'd love to read them in the chat. And I'm just going to pop into the chat my email that I check most often. If you have follow-up questions, some of you had some questions on number talks, like what does it look like for multiplication? And it looks amazing for multiplication. So feel free to hit me up. I'm happy to support ongoing. Yeah, and the garbage estimation, what it does is, you know, and I'm not sure who said it, but it's like if we want kids to care about the lands that they live on, they need to like get connected to the lands. And that's like a super simple way to get them to start caring. And so it's really a purposeful endeavor.
Great. Nikki, thank you so much for sharing the work, giving us this beautiful jumping off point, connecting land, learning, the opportunity to work with community members, to engage in the work. That was me that wrote about the garbage estimation project in the Kootenays in grade 5-6 class, how they adopted an area, and then as they came to understand that place and what was going on, they came to care about that place. And then they moved into like communicating to others what could be done, and if more people got involved, what could that look like? And so there was this it was their math unit, but we went from a group of not super confident grade 5-6 students who were often referred to in the community as struggling with math to students, when we looked at the outcomes, were actually achieving math outcomes beyond their grade level because they became so invested in it, moved forward in that inquiry oriented way.
Yeah, and thank you for saying that. These students that we took with us, you know, in the American system with the standardized test, all, you know, they're not fantastic. All of them were able to participate in the mathematics, but they were also seeing it in really embodied, unique ways. Like one student said that mathematics that really clicked for him was when he was on the rope swing. And I was like, what do you mean? But I mean, I knew what he meant because I've been on a rope swing. And he's like, the timing, like it really matters when you're on a rope swing, when you let go. And that's like an embodiment of physics. And so we talk about that, and we often view math as this very cerebral process. And we forget that like the mind is actually attached to a body, and we learn through our motor sensory. And having these kids out on the land and actually planting, like we planted like hundreds of meters of sweet potatoes and things like that, they were able to really embody like even just those measurements. And it was, yeah, it's a fascinating shift away from a textbook worksheet approach to math. And I cannot emphasize enough how impactful and how quickly it can change their motivation to actually want to engage in more textbook and worksheet math, because they see an importance of it all of a sudden.
Great. Thanks, Nikki, and thank you, Shaheen. We're just so grateful that you were willing to pull things together for this session, to get us thinking about numeracy, to understand how numeracy connects to mathematics, to really push our thinking away from maybe westernized concepts as math as central, to understand that math is embedded in community, in language, in land, and that when we engage in this kind of work with a justice orientation, as Shaheen talked about, it really can be both empowering, engaging, and motivating, because math is used in real ways, in real places, owned by students as they find their voices as mathematicians in numerate ways. Our final session, we always seem to sneak in a fourth one, but at this point, our final session is on February 13th, everyone, which will have a focus on literacy. We hope you can join us. We'll send out a reminder, but Nikki, Shaheen, and Tammy and I were talking in the planning session about, should there be another numeracy session? So be sure to reach out to tell us if you think that should be true. The chat box is available for such comments. We invite you as we close to share anything you'd like, or to unmute yourself on the mic as we close these last couple minutes. Tammy, I pass the torch back to you.
Oh, I just want to say thank you. I'm inspired.
All right, friends, get out there and get into the world. Yes, Shannon, I can't wait to see what's going to happen in Fort Nelson. Thanks for sharing earlier. Vicky, I can't wait for the next session. Robin, thank you for that beautiful example earlier. Taya, great to see you. And everyone else who I haven't mentioned, great to see you all too.
Thanks, folks. See you next time.
Thank you.
Bye, Shannon.